Namaskar ji. Welcome to Atharva forum. We are very happy to invite Professor Tathagat Roy, the former governor of Tripura and Meghalaya, who was also a professor of construction engineering at Jadavpur University. He has authored many books, and one of those books is a suppressed chapter in history, the exodus of Hindus from East Pakistan and Bangladesh between 1947 and 2006. What happened about 75 years back is repeating once again. And so it's so important to talk to you, Dr. Roy. Sir, whenever we think of Bengal, we think of great men like Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, like Rabindranath Tagore, like Swami Vivekananda, like Sri Aurobindo, Ras Bihari Bose, and many others. But eventually, Bengal lost two-thirds of its territory to Pakistan in partition. Hindus are even now, being raped and killed in Bangladesh and even in West Bengal. Infiltrators are trying to convert West Bengal into another Bangladesh. Why did Bengal forget the message of its great men like Bankim, Aurobindo, Ras Bihari Bose? What happened, sir?
See, all these great men that you have just now named, all these perished before the first half of the 20th century was over. And the second half of the 20th century and the first 2 decades of the present century have been dominated in Bengal by much lesser men and women, as a result of which you are seeing the opposite effect of what you would have seen if Sri Aurobindo or Swami Vivekananda or Dr. Syama P Mukerjee, they had been alive. Now we have a set of pygmies. Actually, the last great man to administer Bengal or to have a voice for Bengal was Dr. B.C. Roy, Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy. He died in 1962, and that was the end of the story. After that, it's a continuous tale of darkness.
Interestingly, the Muslim League was founded in the eastern part of India. Normally, we talk about the Muslim League of Punjab, etc. But very few people understand that the more virulent form of Islamism was found in the eastern part of India. So what is the reason why that it was founded in 1905 by Nawab Salimullah there in eastern part of India, and East Bengal played a prominent role in the Muslim politics of India because of that. And mostly we are talking of Punjab,
You see that Nawab Salimullah had, with some companions of his, and as far as I remember, Aga Khan, they had met Lord Molly or Lord Minto, one of the two. Lord Minto at that time was the Viceroy, and Lord Molly was the Secretary of State of India. I think they had waited on deputation to these two people, and they had represented their grievances as Muslims to these British bigwigs. And in order to do that, they thought that they needed to form a society or form a party, and thus they formed Muslim League. But Muslim League really received a shot in the arm only after Muhammad Ali Jinnah joined it. Jinnah was from the other side of the country, that is from Bombay. He was actually a Sindhi but settled in Bombay. And in Bombay, from Bombay, he had a very thriving legal practice, and he had started from there. Now, what I am about to tell you now about Jinnah is largely from the autobiography of M.C. Chagla, who was Jinnah's chamber junior. As a lawyer, lawyers have chamber juniors. And Chagla himself was really a secular person, not quote-unquote secular, really secular person. And Chagla had very clearly said that Jinnah in the early 1920s was considered an ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. But then Gandhiji came into the field and he started this Khilafat movement. He allied with the Khilafat movement, which was a very retrograde movement, which eventually led to the so-called Mopla rebellion, which was actually an anti-Hindu pogrom in the Malabar area of present-day Kerala. So when Jinnah perceived that Gandhiji was playing this orthodox Muslim card, this bigoted Muslim card, then Jinnah thought that he might as well play, he being a Muslim himself, he might as well play that card, and he started doing it. For a time, he was effective in both Congress and Muslim League. Then he went away to England to practice. Then he came back and he was appointed the president for life of the Muslim League. And that is when the real ascendancy of the Muslim League started. That was sometime in the early 1930s. And then we had one after another things done by the British government which helped the Muslims. Number one was the 1932 Communal Award. Then there was the Government of India Act of 1935, which helped the Muslims to a great extent, particularly in Bengal. And that's how the whole thing started. Bengal still had a dominant part in Muslim politics in India until the independence and partition. But after partition or immediately before partition, Punjab took the lead, and Punjab is the dominant force in present-day Pakistan now.
The kind of massacre which took place in Calcutta on 16th August 1946 on the Direct Action Day, this kind of massacre has never happened in India in any other place. So, what is the reason that this kind of thing has? It's continuing. This kind of massacres. These kind of massacres are still continuing everywhere in Bangladesh and even in today's West Bengal, and we find the same kind of virulence. So, how has it continued in Bengal?
See, it's like this. The 1946 16th August thing, which you just now spoke about, is the sequel of a very unfortunate sequence of events. If Maulana Azad is to be believed, he has recorded in his autobiography that a cabinet mission from England had come to India to negotiate with Indian political parties as to how they could be given independence. And they had hit upon a plan whereby India could be kept united and India would have remained intact. Now, Congress and Muslim League both accepted this grouping plan. But then Maulana Azad, until then, was the president of the Congress. He handed over his baton to Jawaharlal Nehru. And Jawaharlal Nehru, immediately after becoming the president, he held a press conference in Bombay. If I am not mistaken, the date was 10th July 1946, when he said that we are not fettered by this agreement or by the grouping plan, and it was his impression that the grouping plan would not work. Now, Jinnah himself was under some pressure within his party for having agreed to the grouping plan, because earlier on they had been demanding Pakistan and grouping plan was in denial of Pakistan. So when Nehru did this kind of equivocation, withdrawing from the grouping plan, Jinnah got an opportunity and said that the Hindus can't be trusted. So we are withdrawing from the grouping plan and we are going to go back to our demand for partition Pakistan. And he announced that on 16th of August, there was going to be a direct action. What was the direct action? The journalist asked him. He said, I'm not going to discuss ethics. In fact, this entire direct action thing, which was the formal name given to the Great Calcullta killings, was something which was not recorded by the Muslim League. It was spread entirely by word of mouth. And I have several sources which said that this is all the Muslims knew about it, but it was entirely spread by the word of mouth, no document, except one or two leaders who could not hold their enthusiasm. They had started speaking about it. But Jinnah was very equivocating about it. He said that we have forged a pistol. We are now in a position to use it. Today we have bid goodbye to all constitutional methods and all these things. So from these, people could not conclude what was going to happen. People had no idea what was going to happen on the 16th of August. Now on the 16th of August, huge crowd gathered, and Calcutta Maidan, to whom Sohrawardi spoke, and they were encouraged to fan out in the city and start killing Hindus. Sohrawardi also said that he had neutralized the police and the military. So then the killing started. Now this thereafter became a pattern. This sort of killing was done in 1950, February, March 1950 in erstwhile East Pakistan. Then it was done in 1964, once again in erstwhile East Pakistan. And then in 1971 during the Bangladesh Liberation War. Thereafter also there have been pogroms and persecution of Hindus, but except the 1992 one, which was caused by the breaking down of the disputed structure in Ayodhya, the rest were not big conflagrations. You know, the rest were simply a process of squeezing out Hindus. Just like you squeeze toothpaste out of a tube, they had adopted a policy of squeezing out Hindus. And that is what they followed. These three great pogroms took place in February, March 1950, thereafter in 1964, I forget the month, and then from March till August, September of 1971. But the Great Calcullta killings of 1946 were a sort of a beacon. They provided the model. Before that, in 1941, there were serious riots in Dhaka, but they were of a smaller magnitude.
So the killings which we have seen and which are still going on in Bangladesh, of the minorities of Bangladesh, there we find a very interesting and very tragic phenomenon that most of the Hindus who are left in Bangladesh, they belong to the Dalit communities, many of them. And we don't find a single Mayavati or single Udit Raj here in India.
See, the way I look at it, very interesting question. Though I look at it, the closest cousins of the persecuted Hindus, who are mostly Dalits, the closest cousin of the persecuted Dalits and other Hindus in Bangladesh are the Bengali Hindus of India. Now, Bengali Hindus of India, having had their up to their necks in Marxism and Nehruvian secularism, used to consider it a sin to point out any misdeed by Muslims. I remember until the 1970s, 80s, even early 90s, if you mentioned the atrocities by Muslims, people used to fidget uncomfortably. They used to say, oh, I'll have to go to the washroom, I'm in a hurry, and that kind of thing. They would not talk about it. It is only towards the turn of the century that the value system of Bengali Hindus began to change, and they are still changing very imperceptibly. Now, because the Bengali Hindus of West Bengal were indifferent to the plight of the Bengali Hindus, mostly Dalits, of Bangladesh, the rest of India remained indifferent, because a Tamil or a Maharashtrian or a Punjabi would argue that if the Bengalis are not bothered about it, then why should I be bothered? I think this is the reason why this thing has not been whipped up.
The partition of Pakistan, how East Pakistan and West Pakistan finally separated and Bangladesh became an independent country. And that happened because of Urdu, mainly because of Urdu. So, do you think that Islam was sitting lightly on their heads as compared to the language? So, was Urdu more important, or do you also see that if the Bangladeshi people have love for the Bangla language, which is rooted in Sanskrit, so tomorrow they'll be able to, find and rediscover their original roots. So, is it good in the long run?
It's a very complex situation. See, first thing, East Pakistan rebelled against West Pakistani domination, not only because of imposition of Urdu, but also because of economic exploitation. There was great economic exploitation by West Pakistanis of the East Pakistanis. The army was dominated totally by West Pakistanis. The civil service was dominated to a large extent by West Pakistanis. It was like that. They had rebelled against this also. Plus, the proper secular leadership in East Bengal, even among Muslims, was frowned upon by the West Pakistanis, and they were trying to suppress them as far as possible. Every Bangladeshi has got two identities. One is an Islamic identity and one is a Bengali identity. And it is difficult for an educated Bangladeshi to completely tear himself off from the, however devoutly religious they are. It is difficult for them to tear themselves off from the Bangladeshi identity. I don't think they want to return to their Sanskrit roots, because the Bangladeshi, the Bengali that is spoken in Bangladesh and the Bengali that is spoken in West Bengal are somewhat different, not quite different, somewhat different, just like the Punjabi spoken in Indian Punjab and the Punjabi spoken in Western Punjab, that is Pakistani Punjab. Plus, there is lately a tendency which had been started by the Pakistanis way back in the 1940s to Arabize the Bengali language in Bangladesh. And familial relationships, say for instance, brother, sister, father, brother-in-law, all these words, these are different in Bangladeshi Bengali and Indian Bengali. Say for instance, in the word for brother-in-law, that is sister's husband, in our Bengali, it is Jamai Babu. Okay, Jamai Babu. And in Bangladeshi, Bengali, it is Dulha Bhai. Dulha Bhai. Similarly, what, as we say Mashi, which is equivalent of Hindi Mosi. Mosi, we say Mashi, they say Khala. We say for Bua, Hindi Bua, we say Pishi, they say Fufa. So this way there are differences, and it is not as if the differences are getting bridged or they are trying to get back to the Sanskrit roots. Perhaps a few very cultured people are, but not very large. Now, as for whether Islam sits very lightly on their heads, the answer is yes and no. See, Islam is a complete code. It guides a person's entire life. It is not a matter of private belief or private worship. So it is there in them, and but as I said, there are two identities in them, and of these two identities, in some the Bengali identity dominates, and those people think that the Bengalis of West Bengal are closer to them than anyone else in the world. And in those in whom the Islamic identity dominates, they think that the Pakistanis or Indian Muslims are closer to them than Bengali Hindus. And the large majority, who are many of them are quite poor, they are not bothered about this thing because they are busy earning their keep. But when sort of a pogrom or any kind of fight against Hindus start, this third group, which is the largest group, they would not mind participating in it and grabbing Hindu property or making use of Hindu girls. It's like that, it's quite complex.
The communists in British India, they had favored the creation of Pakistan, right? And on the principle of right to self-determination. But later on in Bangladesh, the same communist movement vanished. So what is how, I mean, they were so ungrateful to the communists, it seems, the Islamists of Bangladesh.
See, the communists in 1942, a man called Gangadhar Adhikari, he had propounded a thesis called the Adhikari Thesis, which you could say was the mother document of all separatism in India. That thesis proposed that India was not a country. Indians were not a people. They are a combination or a conglomeration of some 18 nationalities. And all these nationalities, they have the right to separate. And so far, no Indian Communist Party has disowned this Adhikari thesis. So when the central thinking behind this Adhikari thesis or its fallout was largely that when the country was separated, when the country was partitioned, there would not be any grounds left between Hindus and Muslims. There would not be any enmity any further between Hindus and Muslims, and they would have a clean field for the cultivation of communism. But they misunderstood the very nature of Islam. That Islam is a complete code and excludes every other code. It's an exclusivist religion. That it excludes every other code, including communism, is not something that was understood by the communists. So as a result, what happened is that in 1948 or 49, the Bengal communists of West Bengal, who were relatively more powerful than the other provinces, they had sent some 3 people to this cultivate communism in East Pakistan. The East Pakistan government promptly put them in jail. And after some years, they were released from jail and they came back to India empty-handed. And gradually, communism vanished. See, communism is a powerful philosophy, but Islam is a much more powerful philosophy. Either by way of active philosophy or by way of being active or by way of being exclusivist. This is why these two things simply can't coexist. Look at what happened in Indonesia. The Communist Party was very powerful in Indonesia. Then practically overnight it was totally obliterated. Their very powerful leader, Adit, was killed. Practically all of communists were killed. So that is the reason why Islam and communism cannot coexist. Islam and Hinduism, which is a pluralist philosophy, can coexist with some great difficulty. Islam and Christianity can coexist because they both share the Old Testament. They can coexist with some difficulty. But Islam and communism cannot coexist.
But sir, certain leftists like Tasleema Nasreen were produced by Bangladesh. Shahryar Kabir, Salam Azad, all these people came from Bangladesh. Why can't Indian Muslims produce a Tasleema Nasreen or a Shahryar Kabir or a Salam Azad? What is the reason?
See, Indian Muslims did produce such people before partition. Unfortunately, they have not received any kind of publicity. Say, for instance, there was this poet, Qazi Nazrul Islam, of whom a lot of people have heard. There was a literature, a prose writer called Sayyid Mujtaba Ali, who was a Bangladeshi Muslim, but he chose to live in India. He was a direct disciple of Rabindranath Tagore. He chose to live in India because he decided that it was not possible for him to live in a theocratic state. Then there were other people like S. Wajid Ali, then Rezaul Karim, then Qazi Abdul Odud. There were people. But in the later years, the second half of the 20th century, Bengali talent in West Bengal had ebbed to such an extent that neither among Hindus nor among Muslims any prominent person rose up, and we only had people like Jyoti Basu who had done untold damage to the state and the people.
Sir, Dr. Syama P Mukerjee had predicted about civil war, you know, and
Yes.
the situation is moving towards that in Bengal.
Yes. No, there was civil war. This Great Calcullta killings, it was a civil war.
It was civil war, yes. But now I'm talking of part two. I mean, I'm talking of the stage when the partition has already happened. So
Yes.
that same thing which Dr. Syama P Mukerjee had talked about a previous era is
Right.
still applicable in
Yes.
West Bengal.
Yes.
So, is there any solution to the problem? Because many people bring forth the problem, but I don't think anybody has come out with a solution to this.
See, I don't
How
think
can we avoid the civil war?
No, you see, I don't think exactly the sort of civil war that we saw in 1946 in Calcutta can happen once again in the Indian state. Because at least today, the Indian state is very powerful. It has got a powerful law enforcing machinery. It has got a powerful military, and that kind of thing cannot happen. But little frictions will go on happening. It is happening whenever the government in power in states, they give encouragement to this vociferous tendencies, to the centrifugal tendencies. That has happened in West Bengal, that has happened it's right now happening in Kerala and a few other places. It used to happen in Jammu and Kashmir before this abrogation of Article 370. So this kind of thing is going to happen. But there is friction, constant friction, some loss of life, some loss of property. But I don't think the kind of civil war that we saw in the Great Calcullta killings or the Noakhali carnage is going to happen, at least not in the foreseeable future.
No, but it is almost like a civil war when people are not allowed to do Durga Puja. People are not allowed to go to the temple in certain areas which are close to the Bangladesh border. Then a lot of freedom of Hindus is not there in areas which are just like the areas. There are some areas which have become just like Bangladesh, 10 kilometers inside international border, and even if you go further from those areas, now it is deepening the areas where it almost looks like Bangladesh. So their small colonies of Hindus are living in the same kind of fear like the Hindus who are living there in Bangladesh, in those areas in Bangladesh. The same thing has happened in West Bengal, and even refugees who are coming from Bangladesh and they enter into West Bengal, they also fear even after coming inside India. So there is a silent civil war which is happening. A silent, at least it could also be a prelude to a very big and very horrible kind of situation which is emerging.
You could call it a prelude to a civil war, but I wouldn't call it a civil war just now. What is now happening is that encouragement to Muslim separatism, Muslim fundamentalism, which is being given by the governments. It is happening in West Bengal because West Bengal has got a big Islamic state as its neighbor. They are infiltrating their own people into the Bangladeshi Muslims into India. They are coming and settling down in the border areas and threatening Hindus. And Hindus by nature being peace-loving, instead of making an issue of it, they are moving out of those areas. It has happened to some parts of Calcutta also, Kolkata also. But if the government, I think so, at least I think, that if the state government shows its power and clamps down on this kind of thing, on Bangladeshi infiltration, on threatening of Hindus, on grabbing of Hindu property, Hindu cremation grounds, Shamshan, these are a very very sought after plots of sought after land by the Muslims. Lot of places Hindus are not allowed to perform the cremations. Many places they simply throw their corpses into the river, something like that. These things can be set right in less than a month if the government is strict. But if the government has got its tongue hanging out for block Muslim votes, then this kind of thing is bound to happen. That is exactly what is happening right now. It is happening in Kerala also, except that Kerala does not have a border state. It is not a border state. So their problem is less.
Very much, Dr. Tathagat Roy, for going in such detail from the pre-partition era till today. The kind of ideologically motivated movement which is happening and which is keeping the Hindu society on defensive throughout because of aggression which is rooted in Islamic ideology, and how demography is playing along with it and causing huge upheaval in this country, and also the deafening silence of the world about the minorities in Bangladesh. All these issues have been discussed in great detail with you during this program, for which we are very, very grateful, sir. Thanks a lot for joining us. Namaskar.
Namaskar.